Hello and welcome to another episode of Data Lounge, where we try to take a little bit more of a more fun, relaxed approach to data. I'm your host, Alejandro Leguizamo, and we have with us today someone really interesting with a lot of crazy content. So buckle up for a very particular session. Mr. Rishi Sabra, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Alejandro. It's great to be here. Good. I've been looking forward to this for a while.
Yes.
Really good to come onto Data Lounge. I've watched most of the other ones that have been on here and
been
very impressed. So yeah, hopefully I can live up to the hype that we've built up around this.
Absolutely. We're really excited to have you finally. You're Power BI. You're a Power BI person. But you told us something about data and data flows and flows of data, something like that. What are you going to be talking to us in this episode?
Yep, absolutely about data flows and why they're important.
Okay.
So I work with a lot of organizations where we try to get a more governed approach to data and using Power BI and rather than letting it get all out of control, how could we manage that data better? How could we make sure that people are using the same data, so we've got single versions of the truth? How can we make sure that that's done centrally and in a managed way? And that's where Dataflows comes in. It's a way for you to take that data that you load into Power BI, those connections to data source systems and those transformations, and centralize them in a Power BI service and in Azure. And then be able for multiple people to be able to take those data, that clean, conformed data, and use it in their data models.
Okay, perfect.
So, should we crack on?
Let's give it a try. Let's see what you have there.
Let's go.
All right.
So, first what I'll do, let's start with Power BI Desktop. And let's just connect to some data. And let's just imagine we're, analysts working in a large organization, and say we'll connect to a SQL database that, contains lots of our corporate data. So there's lots of big volumes of data, lots of people connected to this, which is quite a common scenario. Now, I could go into here in SQL Server and connect directly to the database. And here I have to put in a server name. So I've got a data here with some worldwide importance data.
Okay, good.
Now, when I click OK, it's going to ask me for a username and password, or I think I've already put this in. But here I'm using a generic database username and password, which is quite commonplace across a lot of organizations. And that presents a number of challenges because it's not the best idea from a governance and security perspective.
Correct.
And actually, if this is a kind of centralized managed system, we might want other ways to be able to restrict access to it, or actually to be able to put it into a layer where people can access it rather than connecting directly to that source system. And I just need to connect to the VPN if I'm on the internet.
Let's take a look at that.
Okay.
So I refresh. We're seeing now, we just make a change of connection, obviously, and probably for our audience to see what actually happened behind. Obviously, what we have is security on SQL Server database. So we have a set of firewalls, or firewall with particular IP rules
that are allowed to be able to access.
That allowed to be accessed. So we're connected to a normal network. We are connecting now to the VPN, and that's why we're able to see now the tables.
So now I can see here and I can select the tables. So I can select customers, I can select a fact table, and then I can select related tables. So I've got a fact table here, and it will use the primary foreign keys in the SQL database to be able to give me all those corresponding dimension tables. So, SQL is a really good source to use in this way in Power BI, and it talks very well to it. Once I load the data in, I can go to transform data, and I can apply a lot of these transformation steps using the UI. And some of these will be pushed back to the data source. So if we do steps that supported in SQL Server, it will run them there rather than running them in Power BI. Because it's more efficient. It's called query folding.
Query folding, correct.
And we can apply the transformations that we want to in these tables that we bring in. Now, the challenge with that, again, we have lots of different analysts in the organization, all connecting to this data, all cleaning it and transforming it potentially their own way. Not necessarily knowing how to work with this data. So really, rather than doing this as an analyst in using Power BI, I want to be able to access the data that's already been cleaned and transformed, rather than connecting to the raw data in SQL Server. So that would be another advantage of kind of using Dataflows over doing this process. And then I can click on close and apply, and it will bring my data, it will refresh and bring my data into the Power BI data model. So now it's going to that SQL database and loading all that data in. Now, again, if this is huge volumes of data, and we've got hundreds of analysts across the organization doing this.
This can be very heavy.
Every day. This could be a real hit on the database.
Absolutely.
And every time that data set refreshes, and you could refresh up to 8 times a day.
Yes.
So you've got 48 times a day on premium.
I see that actual SQL database level going up.
Exactly.
And the cost going up with it.
The cost going up. So actually, again, this is one of the real challenges with having multiple data sets all connecting directly to a source system.
Okay.
So, and this is one of the things that Dataflows can really help with, because it provides that single connection to the database, and it provides that staging layer for then Power BI analysts to be able to bring that into their data models and use them in Power BI. So this exercise we've just done now, let's try that using Power BI Service.
Okay, let's try that.
This is how we did it in desktop. So open up Power BI Service, and we've got a fairly empty tenant here. So let's just create a new workspace.
Okay.
And this will be a workspace that could be dedicated to our data flows. Because we can data flows that sit in their own workspace, and that way, through access to the workspace, we can manage who accesses this data.
Perfect.
So only the people who need to access the data will be added to this workspace.
Okay, good.
No one can edit it apart from me, the creator.
The creator.
Hopefully in the future we'll be able to add other admins to it as well, in case we want to. But the way that works at the moment. And now we've got advanced settings. And here we've got this data flow storage. So we're going to leave this off for now. We'll come back to this later.
Okay.
So let's just call this data flows, data lounge original. Actually, let me just call the workspace data lounge original.
There we go.
There you go. Need to keep it concise. Data lounge original.
Okay.
And we click on save. And now we've got all these options to bring in files. Let's start with data flows.
Okay, let's start.
And we have a few options here for the types of data flows that we could create.
Okay.
So we could define new entities, we could link entities from other data flows, import model, and attach a CDM folder. Now we'll come back to these other ones later.
Okay.
We're going to start here just adding a new entity.
Adding new entities.
And the window that it loads up looks very much like the Get Data screen in Power BI Desktop.
Yeah, it's quite familiar in terms of the sources. Definitely.
These are all the same data sources pretty much that we see. And actually what we could do is if we have our query in Power BI Desktop, we can go to Advanced Editor, copy the script, and paste it into a blank query here.
So we would be able to take that M code that is running on our desktop and bring it here to the cloud.
Exactly. So it's a way for us to be able to take that and say, right, now I want to centralize this. I want to actually make these set of transformations, this set of data connections, and this data available more widely across my organization, rather than being tied up too tightly within my PBIX file. Okay. So it's a way to separate it out. Just like shared data sets.
Yes, correct. With the resulting of the data, now we would be centralizing and sharing the logic to generate the data.
Absolutely, and this is what governance is all about. It's all about separating that out, making sure things are managed on their own, independently in the right way.
Independently in the right way. Okay, good.
So now we can go to a Zero SQL database. We can just create a connection ourselves.
Okay.
And I think I've still got it saved in there. Yep. Importers, and I've connected this before, so it's saved my username and password.
Yeah.
Click on next, and we can select kind of those same tables on there. So customers, and say orders, and click on transform data.
Okay.
Now what this will do is it will load up a very similar window to the query editor.
Yes.
Where we can apply those UI steps to be able to
correct.
to be able to transform the data. We've got manage a lot of these things here. So transform table, we can do group by. So if the data's at a different level of granularity than we need in our data model, we can perform some aggregations using this.
Okay, perfect.
And we can also do all the kind of things that we would do in a query editor.
This is basically Power Query in the cloud.
It's Power Query online,
It's basically Power Query as part of the core service, but in a way that allows us this a little bit more of centralization at the end of the day.
Absolutely, as with centralization, it's in the same environment that allows us to run on the cloud.
Okay.
So it's running those resources in the cloud rather than running it on our local desktop.
Right on the local desktop.
It will work on a Mac. And yeah, lots of benefits to having this Power Query online.
Okay.
So let's just let's not apply any transformations at this stage, but let's just save and close. And when we click on refresh, what will happen is it will load this data into this data set, into this entity. Okay. Now, the idea behind this is that this data is then a staged data layer. So then when we go into Power BI Desktop,
Yes.
And whilst this is refreshing, it's probably not going to show empty. But one of the options we've got in Power BI Desktop is to connect to Power BI Dataflows. So now, rather than connecting directly to the SQL Server database,
yes,
we can have a data flow that connects to that database, brings in the data, applies any transformations, and then makes that cleaned, conformed data available to everyone.
To everybody.
So now, rather than doing that, I just connect to Power BI Dataflows.
Okay.
And let's have a look. So I should be logged in already.
Let's see. There it goes.
And that's the one I've got at the moment in there. So once I save this, I need to save the data flow first. So let's call this data flow original.
Okay.
Save that, and then click on. At the moment, these are empty. So if I click on refresh now, that will bring all of that data in.
Okay.
And actually, what we could do whilst that's refreshing, if we go into the workspace, look at data flows, we can see that we've got these options, same as we do for data sets in Power BI Service. So we can go to settings, and we can do things like set up a schedule refresh.
Oh, great. So instead of having this massive, what you were saying before, of having these very large queries running by 100 different users 8 times a day,
all in their data models, exactly.
We can just say we run it once and it's available for everybody.
Yeah, absolutely. So each time this is refreshed, anyone who connects to it gets that refresh data.
And
they don't have to go and perform their own refresh on their own data models to be able to do this. With other data sets, we've got other settings, so things like the information security we can apply on here, things like that. So this is a really good way to manage these centralized data flows. And as I say, if you have a workspace dedicated to these, you can manage those by the team that can manage this data and knows how to manage it.
Fantastic, excellent. Okay.
Right. So once it's doing that, let's just see now. Hopefully, we should see something in Power BI Desktop come up.
Let's look
so here you go, Data Lounge Original. There it is. And data flow. That's the data flow we just created. And then these are the entities. So this is our cleaned, conformed data that we can then bring into Power BI. And we don't really need to apply any transformations more. We might be able to, but we should hope that this data is now ready to use. And all
the logic is already there. At the end of the day, it's M, right? It's the same M code.
Exactly.
The same code that we are used to work with from the Power BI side, even if from Excel, if somebody was working with Power Query and Power Pivot or the data model within Excel, it's exactly the same code at the end of the day.
Exactly the same code. Even data wrangling, data flows.
Yes, correct.
So it's all coming together.
Okay.
Right. So this is a way for us now then to connect to data flows.
Excellent.
Now the question might be, well, where is this data stored?
Yes,
because it's in a
staging layer. It has to be somewhere.
It's just in the cloud. We just grab it from the cloud when we need it. And do you know where the data is stored?
If we're talking about Microsoft Cloud, it has to be somewhere, some Azure storage somehow.
Azure storage.
But where? Where exactly? Can we see that?
Azure storage, Data Lake Gen 2.
Okay.
So open up Storage Explorer.
Yes.
And we're here under the storage accounts. We can refresh those, and we should see some storage accounts that I've created before. So here's the storage accounts where we've created it. Now, what it is we won't see the storage account of where I just saved this data flow.
Okay.
Because by default, we didn't have that storage option enabled.
Oh, just the one that you said we would come back to.
We'll come back to. So we didn't turn that on. So even though it does store the data in the data lake, we don't have access to that data lake.
We cannot see that data lake.
We cannot see that data. It's just managed behind the scenes.
The cameras.
Yeah, exactly. Behind the cameras, behind the scenes, that's all managed by Microsoft.
All right.
So that's one way of doing data flows where it does it in data lake. And we have, and that counts as part of our Power BI usage.
Okay.
So on a pro license, it's 10 gigabytes per user.
Yes.
And on premium, it's 100 terabytes per node.
Wow. Massive.
So we've got quite a bit of storage, but it's managed as part of that.
It's part of, but we don't see it.
We don't see it. We don't access it or manage it.
It's there for us to consume, but we don't actually get to see that account.
Absolutely.
Okay.
But what we can do is if we have an Azure storage account in our tenants that we want to store Power BI data in, we can set that up in the right way.
Okay.
Tell Power BI that this is our data lake storage account, and then it will write it back to that.
Okay.
So why do we do that? Let's have a look.
Okay, let's give it a try. Let's see that.
Yep, let's see that. So what we do is we go into the Azure portal.
Yes.
And we create a storage account. So create a resource. Let's go to storage account.
There we go from the list.
Yep. Let's give it a resource group. So Dataflows demo.
Good.
Is always a good one. Let's call it Data Lounge, if I could spell. And the location here has to be exactly the same location as where our Power BI tenant is.
As where the tenant is. And this is very important to highlight while you continue with this configuration, because we've seen in other products that it's relevant to specify clearly where the storage account is so that the rest of the products can see it. We've seen it with Databricks, we've seen it with other products.
Yeah.
It's important here as well.
It's important here to make sure it's in the same region. So if we need to go back into the Power BI service, we can click on the help and about Power BI, and we can see that it's UK South, London. So nice and local.
Good.
So we can click on that and make sure that in here, we change the default from US and put it into UK South.
Good.
The other things we need to do, it's a V2 account, and under advanced, we need to make sure we enable hierarchical namespace.
Which is actually, we're not covering that, obviously, I would imagine in this session. But for our audience over there, a very quick summary, Azure Storage Account. In generation 2 of Microsoft Storage, we have two flavors. We have the more blob storage traditional one, but we also have the data lake store, which is enabled by enabling this actual flag of the hierarchical namespace.
Yeah, absolutely. So now this is just creating.
Okay.
And as soon as that is done, we'll be able to see it in Azure Storage Explorer.
Okay, good.
Hopefully.
Good.
And what we need to do then is, just give that a minute.
Separation details. For our audience, for those of you that have never created or interacted a lot with Azure and are coming more from the Power BI world, what you're seeing right now, this is the main Azure portal. And what we're seeing in this particular case is the process of provisioning a resource. That's the language used. It's provisioning a resource, creating a new type of compute capability. In this particular case, it's storage. And what you saw there, that's called the deployment. That's what tells you, hey, you are creating this resource and it's giving you the status of it. It seems we finished, right?
Yep, I think so. That seems to have created. So if we go now into that subscription, we should hopefully see that. We can see it in Azure portal. That will load up in a minute in Storage Explorer.
It's taking some time.
It is, isn't it? It's always the case with demos.
These are the demos. These are live demos. It doesn't get any more live than this.
It's how the world works. Right, so here we can see the storage account in the Azure portal. And what we need to do is we need to make sure that Power BI can talk to this storage account.
How do we do that?
So we have to give it rights. So actually Power BI as a service is actually like an application that sits as part of Azure. There's an application in Azure that's called Power BI service. And then we give that service, that object, Mr. Power BI, rights to the storage account. So here under access control, we've got we can add role assignments. So we need to be able to have the rights on the storage account itself or the resource group. Let's give that another minute.
I'm gonna just give it a moment to finish the provisioning behind.
Is there something with the internet?
Let's give it a moment. It's asking you to authenticate. There we go. DBA data lounge.
Data lounge, here you go. So now we can add a role assignment.
And
let's close that. So the role we want to give it is read and data access. So there's a role specific for that, reader and data access.
Good.
And we can search for the user, essentially a user, called Power BI service.
It's a Power BI service. Now, for our audience that is not that familiar with Azure concepts, this Power BI service member, did we have to create it when we provision the tenant, or it's already there and Azure knows that it's already there?
It knows it's already there.
It's
part of the Azure environment. So when we have Power BI enabled in that tenant, it creates the objects.
It creates the objects necessary for that.
Within the Azure
good.
AD. So here you go. So you can say save to that. And so now we've given Power BI rights to it. What we need to do is be a little bit more detailed on giving it specific rights to access the folder. So if we go back into Storage Explorer, and hopefully that will...
We do a refresh on here.
We do a refresh and see if that loads. Here you go. This is starting to look better. Now we can see our data lounge.
Yes, there it is.
AWS Gen 2, great. So now we can click on that, and we need to create a blob container.
Good.
And we have to. It has to be called Power BI. Again, this is one of the
It has to be called Power BI.
Power BI.
Important for everybody watching this video. Has to be called Power BI. Don't put on it raw or conformed, it has to be called Power BI for this kind of integration.
Absolutely. So we call it Power BI.
Okay.
And we've created our blob container under there called Power BI, and this is where our data flow is going to write data back to.
Okay, good.
Now, what we could do is, again, we still need to give access to the various Power BI services. There's a couple of actual services that we need to give access to this particular one.
Okay.
So what we'll have to do is go back into the Azure portal, go to Azure Active Directory.
Yes.
Look at our enterprise application. So as I say, it's our Power BI is an application.
Correct.
And we'll go to all. And if we go to Power BI, we can see we've got two there, Power BI Service, Power BI Premium. Let's just take the object IDs of both of those, copy it into our notepad.
A little bit of a snippet file, always helpful.
Absolutely. And the other one, the other service that needs access to this is Power Query Online.
Oh, okay. So it's there actually. Power Query
It's a
Online.
service.
Great.
It's a service.
Okay.
Yep, absolutely. So now we've got our three object IDs.
Good.
So we can take each of those and go back into Storage Explorer, go into our Power BI blob container.
Yes.
Right click, manage access, and give access to those specific object IDs. So that's why we went in there to get those. So we can add of those, search for using that object ID.
Very sharp in a moment.
Yeah,
there it
so
is.
Power BI service.
And it identifies actually that it's Power BI service, showing us the name of the service itself.
Which is helpful to know you got the right thing.
Yes.
So we'll give it read, write, and execute access. So we want Power BI to be able to access this, and we do the same thing for those other two services as well.
For these other two services. Well, Rich is working on doing that for the other two services. Important to know. For some of us that might not be that familiar, this operation that Rich is doing is working with the Active Directory. Now, if you might not necessarily, if you're trying to do this, you might not necessarily have permissions to do this because access to Active Directory can be restricted. But we're doing, and one of the great things of what Rich is showing us today is that he's showing us the full process. So if you need to work with your network administrator or your Active Directory administrator, you can show exactly what you want to do. Make sure, we would suggest, if you're watching this video and you're in YouTube, make sure you bookmark right now this moment in the video. So when you're trying to do this, you can show your administrator, look, this is exactly what we need to happen on Active Directory.
And this isn't typically an analyst type role. This is done once per tenant.
Exactly.
So it's just a one-off for your whole organization.
Okay,
but once it's set up, everyone can then use it.
Everyone can then use it. Okay,
so
great.
We've set this up now. We've set up the rights, and we just need to copy the subscription ID.
Okay.
And then when we go into Power BI, and we go into the admin portal, so again, it needs someone who's got access on the admin side for the tenant, Power BI tenant. There's an option in here for data flow settings.
Yes.
Now, I've already set this, and it can only be set once.
Okay.
So if you haven't set this, it will ask you for that subscription ID and for the name of that storage account.
And the name of the storage account.
So this is what I've set up before called Dataflows demo. So that's what we're going to use from this point forward.
Perfect.
But if you go into this and it hasn't been done, you need to just put in that subscription ID and then allow workspace admins to assign workspaces to it.
Okay, and perfect. And this would allow us already then to have that connectivity and that scenario directly to an existing or brand new storage account that we can actually see, and we're going to be able to see what's put in there.
Right, absolutely. Okay. So now let's create another workspace, and this time let's put that storage enabled to that.
Let's do it.
So now we can create workspace, and let's call it Data Lounge and write back. And so under the advanced options, let's tick that option to enable data flow storage. And it tells us here that it's going to be stored in our organization's data lake Gen 2 account, which we just set up.
Correct.
And linked entities will be to workspaces. That's fine. So now when we go to data flows, we go through exactly the same process. So we just create a data flow. So bear in mind, in the same tenant, we can have some workspaces that have it enabled and some that don't.
Okay,
and the data flows could be the same between them.
Okay, perfect.
So let's define new entities. And again, let's bring this back. Let's just connect again to that SQL database
that we had before.
Oops. All right, so Azure SQL database.
It's very interesting that we can have this capability of some of them enabled, some workspaces enabled.
Absolutely.
It's more granular, and it gives us more control of enabling features.
It's not a one-size-fits-all. It allows us to, for certain data sources, to be able to say, right, I want this to be written back to the data lake for whatever reason. We'll come into why you might want to do that now. And then, for some other data sources, you might not want to. You might just Power BI might be the only place you want to have that data.
Okay, perfect.
So here we could do, again, we could bring in a couple of data. So actually, I'll bring in some small tables just so this loads quickly.
Okay.
Click on Transform Data. Save and close.
Validating queries. We've seen this before.
And again, obviously, we can apply the transformations before. In the interest of time, we're
just saying,
come
table. Table, come here.
Well, actually, there's also a benefit, I think, in actually putting the raw data in here. Because you're putting the data into that layer in Data Lake. And when it's in there, you can do whatever you want with it. So
once you have it, it's all yours to play with.
Yeah, and Azure can play with that.
Don't worry, security people. We're thinking of you as well. Don't worry.
Absolutely. Well, this is the point. You can play with it with tools that are centrally managed and governed. So Azure tools, enterprise stack.
Enterprise
and this is the real benefit of Dataflows, is that it starts to allow you to take your Power BI data and manage it through the enterprise stack, through the Azure data platform.
And definitely, while Rishi is finishing this configuration, the more we're seeing Power BI being successful and adopted, the more Power BI is actually facing some of the questionings of traditional enterprise, right? It's Power BI has stopped definitely being the only or limited only to small teams. It's definitely enterprise ready for very large organizations, actually. And these are the kind of things that when you're talking to large IT teams in organizations ask for. They say, how can I secure it? How can I make it scalable? How can I have it centralized?
Yep, absolutely. And you might not want to do that initially, but as it grows, you might build something as a strategic prototype on your desktop.
Correct.
But then you want to roll that out to a wide audience, and there's lots of production data in there. And that's where you need to start getting
that more control on that.
We want more control on that, absolutely. So I've just created that data flow and just refreshed it. So now I'll go back to Data Loud workspace, so that's refreshing. Let's just see, we should start to see this appear now here as a folder.
Okay.
So once that's refreshed, we will see what it will contain once this refreshes. Is the files, CSV files. So what it does is it takes that data, regardless of whatever source it was. So it could be a SQL database, it could be, OData.
JSON, a service.
Absolutely. And it will store that data in the Azure Data Lake as CSV files.
Okay, so the format for the storage is going to be CSV.
Absolutely. Okay. So it's universal, accessible. You can work with it in lots of different ways.
Consumable.
Everything knows how to read CSV files from Data Lake.
Yeah, probably for some of you viewers and the people joining us, we're grateful for that in this video. One of the interesting things about storing information in CSV when we're talking about blob storage, we don't cover it here, obviously, and we haven't had yet a session on the deep dive of blob storage, but one of the advantages of storing it like that is that internally, the way the blob storage works is that it enables to have these CSVs structures to be read in parallel. So blob storage is a massively distributed file system that if we were to have other technologies like Databricks, we had a session about Databricks with Brian Burton, look in the in our channel. We were able to see how Databricks was able to split the workload to take advantage of that parallelism of blob storage. And CSV as a format is something that blob storage is able to manage better for those kind of operations as
Absolutely. So our data flow here is called Dataflows Writeback.
Okay.
And now we look at blob storage, and we can see it there. Data Lounge Writeback is the workspace name.
Perfect.
And Dataflows Writeback is our data flow name. And within there, we can see this file, this model.json.
Okay.
We'll come and have a look at that in a minute. Okay. And then here we can see within each of these folders, these are the sales buying groups and customer categories. Those are the two files are brought in, and these are the CSV files that actually writes into the file. So wondered what this model.json file is, and this is really interesting. This is where Dataflows really takes on a whole new shape.
Okay.
Because what it's doing there is defining the metadata, defining the whole data flow.
Okay.
The metadata of the entities in there, and what their columns are, what their data types are, plus any transformations that applied. So it's actually got the M script for the beginning. So if we just open up an example model.json, based off this same data set, we can see here, this is what it looks like. So it's a metadata definition of this data flow. Okay. So what it's defining is all of the different tables that we have in there. And it refers to these as entities. These are called entities.
Okay.
And it says, what's the query ID? So these are the tables that we load into our data set, into our data flow. And then it has for each of the entities, it has what those types are, which columns they have in there, and what the data type of each of those columns. So here we can see we've got buying group ID, it's data type int64. We've got delivery method, credit limit, all of these different ones that we have on those categories. What we also have here is where we've applied any transformations, the M code is actually in here as well.
Okay.
So it actually includes everything to do with that data flow. And the whole idea is actually that represents the data flow in its entirety. Okay. So just through this one model.json file, you can import and export a data flow between workspaces. Okay. You can version control your data flows by using these files.
Fantastic.
And more importantly, you could use this to define what your entity should look like. You should say, right, in our organization, we have a customer entity, a customer dimension that we want to use in reporting.
Okay.
It has these 6 fields. They are always called name. They're not called full name. They're not called first name. They're called name.
Okay.
They're called, and it's data type this. We have, for every customer, we make sure we have an ID and it's data type this. Okay. So we define centrally what those attributes look like. We make sure that everyone's using the same data in the same way.
And it's great because we have now a source control mechanism and something that we can track changes over time, which is one of the challenges that we have with the more desktop experience on Power BI.
Absolutely, and especially because it includes all those transformations as well. It includes all the M code. It includes those entity relationships if any exist. Okay. So all of that's defined within this JSON file. So this is really helpful for us to be able to do that. And actually, let's come back to Power BI and have a quick look at these data flows. Because if we click on here and we click on the data flows, say we go back to our original one.
Yep.
And we can edit the entity. So say we just pick one of the tables to edit. What we see here is, once we're in this, what we could do is, there's an option here to map to standard, which we don't see in Power BI Desktop. Okay. But it's here in Dataflows in Power BI Service. And what this brings up is a list of standard entities that come from Dynamics 365 and SAP. Okay. That are part of what Microsoft have built called a common data model.
Yes, the CDM.
The CDM. And this is a collaboration between Microsoft, SAP, and Adobe. Okay. And they've defined a whole set of general entities with all of their fields. So we could have a look here in contact, and we'll see for contact, they've got all the generic fields, and there's lots here for each one. So, address to city, address to country, full name. So if we are using one of these standard entities out the box, then we can map our data to these. Okay. And that way we know that, one data source might call it first name, one data source might call it name, but we call it full name, whatever it is. So then, we have something that we call it here, that we say this is our entity. This is what it's defined as across the organization. Okay, good. So that's how you map to standard entities. Okay. And if we don't choose to map to standard entities, then it creates a custom entity, which is defined through this JSON file. Okay, got it. And this file is produced regardless of whether or not you write back to the data lake. So what we can do here is actually, if we cancel out of this, and we go back into the data lounge, we can see in here in data flows, we've got the option there to export JSON. Okay. So this data flow will then give us that JSON file, which we can then manage. Okay, good. So now we've got our data in data lake. So each time we refresh that data flow, it's going to create our data and it's going to give it to us here. Now you might think, okay, well, what's the advantage of having this data now sitting in our data lake? And there's lots of advantages. Because now it's not just Power BI that can consume this data. We can consume this data in Azure Machine Learning. Okay. And then we can run some scripts on it and pass it back. Okay. We can run some Databricks scripts on it. Yes. And again, write it back to Data Lake or do whatever we want with this data. Okay. And then expose that maybe back into Power BI. Okay. So let's have a look at an example of that. All right. So what we've got here is a Databricks script. Yes. A Python script that we're going to run in Databricks. And this reads a CDM folder, and applies some transformations to the entities, and then writes them back out to a new CDM folder. Okay. So here, we could have done some of these transformations potentially in Power Query, but actually this is a much more enterprise way of doing it. Okay. We can do much more complex transformations than we could into Power Query, and we're managing them through things like Data Factory. We're managing them through our enterprise stack, which is quite important, and through a language like Python, which is very flexible. So it reads input. We start by defining the input location. So we put the path of that JSON file. Yes. And we put a folder in that same data lake storage, but to a different folder.
Okay.
So what it will do is then read the entities from that folder, and it applies some transformations. So here in this case, it's saying where there's null in the bind group ID, it will assign it a value of unassigned.
Okay, good.
So in the dimension table, it creates a -1 key, unassigned as a value.
A pretty standard dimensional ETL ELT approach.
Absolutely, and then replaces any nulls with that -1.
Okay.
So then it maps it back to that. Does a couple of other things like adds a compute columns for history tracking, excludes corporate customers, and then here we go write all entities back to
the CDM folder.
Back to CDM, and this cluster has stopped whilst we've been talking to save costs. And here we can run all, and we'll see as we start to see this happen. What it will do is run through, read those entities from that folder, apply those transformations, and then write it back to CDM.
Okay.
And then we can again potentially consume that as a data flow.
Okay.
So the idea is that we can make our data from Power BI data flows.
Yeah.
Maybe that clean conform data, maybe that raw data, available to the rest of the organization, to data scientists, to analysts who want to be able to work with this data. So really, really useful to be able to then integrate Power BI with the Azure services.
Fantastic.
So let's just look at a couple of ways now. Let's go back into Power BI.
Okay.
And let's look again at data flows and at creating a data flow. And let's just go through those options that we have here.
Okay.
So this first one, define new entities, is what we did initially.
Yes, correct.
So we did define a new entity, and we just created that on the Power BI service.
Okay.
Link entities from other data flows. Now, what this allows us to do is to connect to data flows that are in other workspaces and connect to have a chain of data flows.
Okay.
So again, what we could do is we can have one data flow that has all of our raw data, and then in another workspace, perhaps have a subset of that data, or transformations applied to that data, so that could be used in another case. So when one refreshes, it kicks off the chain, and they all refresh. Now, bear in mind, linked entities is actually a premium feature.
Okay.
So whilst I can create them here, I need a premium license to refresh it. Import model. Now, this is what I was talking about, where you can select a JSON file, and it will just use that data flow definition and import it into here.
And import it directly
So
here.
it's a way for us to be able to import and export a data flow from one workspace to another.
And probably if we're talking about life cycle point of view, you have a development one where you're making changes, adjustments, you could import it into a more UAT test or other environments, promotion to other environments.
Yep, absolutely. So what I'll do actually, let me just go back to the right back workspace and into data flows and into settings. And here we can actually see the path of that JSON file.
Yes.
And this is one, for example. Now what we wanted to do is back in our data flows.
Yeah.
If we did create data flow again, so I'll just copy that. So yeah, we can import the model. So this is the way to import and export data flow definitions.
Okay.
And this last one here is really interesting, because what it's doing is attach common data model folder.
Yes.
Now what we do here is exactly the same thing as import model, in the sense if we select a JSON file, we give it the path of a JSON file on Data Lake Gen 2. But the difference with this is once we import this in here, that data flow is no longer editable here.
Oh.
So it's read-only in Power BI. Okay. So actually, let's try that. And we can actually just attach the one we just created. So if we go into here and we do read-only sales.
Okay.
What we see here is it's external. So we don't have the ability now to edit this or to refresh it or nothing. Now, the real advantage of this is actually that we can create our model.json and our data using Azure completely. Land it in Azure Data Lake Gen 2 and then just expose it to Power BI.
So Power BI already has a set of clear, consistent entities that it simply consumes no matter where they're coming from, and being able to be produced from other tools, not necessarily to be generated by Power BI.
Exactly. So Power BI can be used for the self-serve. And actually, this is the whole point, because you can have all. So we've seen 3 options with data flows, right? We've seen option 1 is you create a data flow in the Power BI service, and you keep it in Power BI. With it, it's managed a data lake behind the scenes, but you don't access that or manage that. You just consume it in Power BI. The second option is you create a data flow using the Power BI service, but you write it back to the data lake. And then the third option is you create your model.json, your entity definitions, and your data
and we consume
in
it
Azure, and you consume it in Power BI. And the fact is you can have all three of those in the same tenant. So it's a way for your data sets to become more mature, to become more governed as you go. So you might start with some self-serve.
And with some small proof of concept, to users working with it.
Exactly. And then you migrate to actually having the sandpit environment that links with Azure that you can write back to. And that data could be used elsewhere. And then actually once it's kind of completely governed and managed in Azure, then you can say, right, now for my corporate entities that exist across the organization, I just want to consume those in Power BI and expose it as a data flow and then connect to it in Power BI Desktop via the data flow.
Fantastic. Wow, that was a full journey.
full journey of
Dataflows. Rishi, thank you very much.
Hey, thank you, Alejandro.
It was a fantastic session, going through every single step that is needed for us to have all these different scenarios with Dataflow. Definitely very interesting to have to see and interact with this Power Query directly in the cloud. I think that's absolutely fantastic, and it's a wonderful capability of the product, but also at the same time the integration that would allow us to use other Azure services to interact with that, not only with the data, but also with the model that is represented by that.
Absolutely.
So, thank you very much, Rishi.
Thank you,
lovely to have you here. We almost never got you here.
I know. I look forward to coming back again if you're happy back again.
Absolutely, we'd love to. And for all of you watching this video, thank you very much for joining us in one more episode of Data Lounge. If you like this video and if you want to have more news about when we come with something else, please don't forget to subscribe at the bottom. And thank you, everyone. Have fun whenever, wherever you're watching this video. Cheers.
Thank you.